Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Agency Journey. I'm your host, Kuba, and with me on the call today is somebody you might already know, Gray McKenzie, Zen Pilot founder, CEO, and previous host of Agency Journey. Gray, welcome back to the show.
It is amazing to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for having me, Kuba.
Yes, long-time listener to be sure. That was me when I was joining Zen Pilot. I was like, long-time listener.
Right.
Now I'm meeting the man behind the show, and now I am the man behind the show. What a journey! What a journey! An agency journey. Okay, first part of the episode is out of the way here. Great. What have you been up to recently? Before we get into agency stuff, what's been happening?
I am sitting here at the little recording studio desk, and I am keeping my hands like this far apart as I'm sitting down, and I'm trying super hard to not itch poison ivy that I've got from working outside. So I'm sure everyone wanted to hear about what strange itches we have going on. But work-wise, I've been really focused on and going back to what we're doing from a delivery perspective, and just finding ways to simplify. This is we've talked a million times about EOS on this podcast, and one of the 5 leadership practices that they talk about is the ability to simplify. And just trying to find ways to simplify what we're doing. So that's been the big focus work wise. And then obviously I'm trying to simplify my posture here and not be moving my hands all over the place as we're talking.
Okay, yeah, well, a little bit of extra challenge there, but hey, you're seasoned at this. I mean, a little bit extra spice, I think, is exactly what the doctor ordered. Maybe I'm just trying to put a positive spin on it. I'm sorry to hear about that, just in general.
All good. It was a great weekend. Spent a ton of time working out on the hill here, and got a lot of downed stuff cleared out. So it was a fun time clearing and burning and working outside for most of the weekend. But I did not come out 100% unscathed. So. It's all right.
Okay. That's neat. On this end, we spent the weekend at my parents' house, which is always super special. The weather was great. We have a small backyard there. We brought out the water guns, and we just had like a major water gun fight. And it turns out, Ben, my 3-year-old, was super enthusiastic about it. But my wife was like ruthless, man. It was 2v1, of course, against Dad. And I was like drenched at the end of it. But hey, I looked back on that day. I was doing my gratitude journal at the end of that day, and I was like, I literally wrote there, like, what a memory we made today. Wow. So yeah, more weekends like that is what I wish for everyone.
That's right.
Alrighty, let's get into the topic of the episode. This is so cool, like to have somebody to talk with, on a regular basis, to dig into like various parts of your POV here, Gray. And like, I'm looking to have a conversation, kind of both ends, but definitely this is about your catchphrase, kind of the main part of your point of view. We've touched upon this on many other agency journey episodes. You've talked about this on other podcasts, but today we're doing a dedicated episode all about clarity. And specifically, I talked about your catchphrase being clarity is kindness. Whenever you mention that on LinkedIn, it resonates in a strong way. So this episode is all about digging as deep as we can into that. So I thought, for starters, what I would like to do is, before we talk about clarity, is to talk about the opposite of clarity. So right now, I think where we might start here is, let's talk about the lack of clarity. We talk about, chaos. We might put a better or, different label on it, maybe throughout this conversation, maybe sometime in the future. But I would like you to think of, the typical agency journey audience, an agency owner. We call them agency operators because it's not always the person at the very, very top. If they're dealing with lack of clarity, if they're having, chaos, however we might call it, in their organization, what are the surface level symptoms? What are they looking at? How do they know that this problem exists?
Right. I've talked a little bit before about vision, and that I think is the most common place. There's the proverb that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think that's where probably a lot of folks think about lack of clarity, is think of the word vision, and then, it's not 100% clear. But I'd say I've talked before about the archetypes of agency owners, and one of those is the accidental agency owner. And for most folks, the road into building this business and building the life that goes with it was not the way that they didn't draw this up at 18 years old and say, here's what I'm going to go do with my life, and here's where I wound up 6, 7, 20, 30 years later. And so one of the things that then gets associated to that is they're kind of on this creative journey,
Right.
and the vision's not completely clear to them. Well, then compound that with not being somebody hired by that person. And so there is no clear, like, where exactly are we headed as a business? So we've often fallen into patterns. Hey, there's a pattern here. We grow 10, 15% most years. I get a 2% raise at the end of the year. Like, there's stuff that goes along with it. And that's kind of inferred as okay, I guess that's what our vision is. There's other folks who are, wow, this owner wants to just grow like crazy. I don't know. It's always going to be crazy and chaotic here. We're constantly trying new stuff and bouncing all over the place. But I guess that's the starting point is most of the lack of clarity is unintentional. It's not, we're not intentionally obscuring stuff. It's just the default way of things. And then it shows up probably the first place in a lot of people's minds in terms of the vision. Where are we as an organization and team headed? What is the ultimate goal for us?
So are you talking about cases where, for example, you're on a call with your team, you ask somebody about the vision and it's basically blank stares. They're not able to, give elements of the vision when asked, or is there something else there?
I'd say that, or like the joke is like, ask Kuba, like he knows what it is, or we all just default to that. But if you did pin people down and say, hey, where's your business going? They could say, hey, we serve these types of businesses. Sometimes that's geographic. We can talk about how this plays into positioning, for sure. But then, like, okay, well, what does success look like in the business? What does that look like in your role specifically? And you'll get 10 different answers from 10 different people on the team around what exactly it looks like. Versus clarity here is, hey, this is identified, it's written down. We all can close our eyes and picture the same thing at the end of this year and at the end of 3 years and say, that is the goal. Will we wind up there? Almost certainly we will not wind up exactly there. That's incredibly rare. We might overshoot it, we might undershoot it, but that's the goal. That's what we're striving towards.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a second, if you'll allow me. Why is that important? As in, I've been at various other organizations. When we were talking about the vision, this was something that we came back to at best once a month, more typically once per quarter, or there was like a big company event once a year. The vision was, mentioned, maybe updated with some fanfare, but it was left in the realms of, okay, we use that sometimes to motivate ourselves or to remind ourselves. Never really felt relevant in that kind of organization to the day-to-day operations or daily decisions. So can you kind of connect the two? So what are the knock-on effects of people not being clear on the vision?
Right. Yeah. And a tangent that I'd throw in here first is, I think often you think of like, hey, the owner is the person who owns the vision, among things. And I don't disagree that they own it, but I would say like they direct to the vision. They need to be clear about, hey, this is my business. This is where I want this business to go. The goal, what we're after in terms of creating clarity for people, is everyone owns the vision. This is where we're going. And then the connection has to be, and I'm reading through Extreme Ownership with the Leadership Team right now by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Love that book, yeah.
Talk about decentralized command. And you've got to, there's a lot of good lessons. There's plenty of perspectives on that book and their personalities, but there's a lot of good lessons in there. And the only way that folks on your team, other leaders internally, are able to make the right decisions consistent with a vision is if that vision is super clear. So the impact becomes then, well, what do we do in the day-to-day? What are you focused on this month or this quarter or this week or today, versus what am I focused on versus what are 17 other people focused on internally? The only way that that's all going to be consistent with a vision is if there was that clear vision at the beginning. So otherwise, it's all just kind of up to you hope that people are obviously motivated, and you hope that they generally have a vision that somewhat aligns with yours. And sometimes that works well, and sometimes that doesn't work well. But those are the knock-on effects, or the to answer the devil's advocate of why do we need to spend any time on vision at all, is early on you need to spend way less time on vision because you're all just figuring it out together, and it's just a much smaller group of people.
Right.
And the more that group expands, the more there are other leaders. And now it'll cause other misalignment issues down the road, but the more that group expands, the only way for you to not at some point be creating friendly fire or campaigns or projects that are kind of at odds or knocking heads together is to have an aligned vision.
Yeah, I like that. And I do think you've answered the devil's advocate here adequately. So, what would you say to an agency owner who's nodding their head at this and thinking, okay, there's not enough clarity on the vision, or maybe it's in my head, I want it to be in the team's head as well. What would you say to them in terms of, like, practically speaking, here's what you do, here's how you fix that?
Yeah. First thing is, I'd say just relax. Like, this is not, it's an important problem, but it's not super difficult. But like, the more that we complicate all this stuff, the more that strategy and vision becomes like, oh, I need to be out thinking about strategy and vision 3 days a week. And, I already have a full plate of stuff. The more overwhelming it becomes, and it just gets too complicated when we try to give it, when we allow it to become overcomplicated in our heads. So instead, super simple, like roughly what size of business, who are we serving in our business? What's the ultimate reason that this business exists? Like, how do we go get those clients, and how do we go serve those clients or customers? And then, what does the team look like that's going to deliver on that? What does the day-to-day experience look like? And this is all going to be at the beginning aspirational. And the farther and farther on you go, like, some of those things get checked off, but there's always some element of it. It's not a vision if it's not somewhat aspirational. Hey, we are not yet there, but we're working as hard as we can to achieve this vision. So, you could certainly buy into any of the operating infrastructures. You could run on EOS like we do and say, oh, here's your vision traction organizer. What a dumb name, but what a powerful concept and powerful tool that is. So some simple way to answer the basic questions of where this business is going.
Okay. So can you talk about, just for a moment, I would love to fill in the details of kind of operationally speaking. I mean, we keep that on ClickUp, kind of within our project management tool. And can we spend just a minute on, like, the advantages of that? I wanted to make it tangible in the watchers and listeners' minds of how it's structured, where it lives, when it's referenced, just so they can take it and apply it.
Yeah, for sure. So we keep all of that inside of ClickUp. We've got a state of the company meeting every State of ZenPilot address. It's our SOZA every quarter. And there should always be some element of reviewing. We'll always be reporting back on how we've done according to goals. We're rolling out new quarterly objectives or rocks that are all tied back to our 1-year plan and our 3-year plan. That's ultimately tied back to our long-term picture. But yeah, we keep it inside of ClickUp. Everyone's got access to kind of every component of it. And on that vision traction organizer, for us, think of that as like your 1-page or 2-page, almost business plan. You've got on the left-hand side, like, what's our mission here? So for ZenPilot, that's turning chaos into clarity. And then how do we do that? And so that is like, or what's the application of that? What does that look like in practice? That's where we're helping build healthier, more productive, and more profitable teams. That's like the why we exist. And then you get into, well, how does that play out? How do you actually deliver on it? What's your target market, and kind of the marketing component is, who do you serve? How do you serve them? What are the characteristics of that market? And then, on the right-hand side, if you're looking at this on a piece of paper, you've got, the 3-year picture. So what are the measurables at the top? That's things like revenue, profit, team size, clients served. What does that look like? And then down below it, a handful of bullet points around what do things look like 3 years from now. So and we'll walk through this together as a team. When it's New Year's Eve, we take the last week of the year off as a team for the holidays. And so when it's New Year's Eve of 2026 and you're sitting there reflecting back on, wow, what a crazy journey these last 3 years have been at ZenPilot, I want everyone to think of these bullet points, and different people will gravitate to different ones more, but be like, wow, that's so cool that we accomplished that. We do take the team on a annual offsite every year. We do have dedicated time for R&D, and we're building this leveraged expertise business very intentionally. And so, that's kind of more tangibly what that looks like.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of the offsite, and the first time I encountered the ZenPilot Vision Traction Organizer was actually, I felt like I was thrown in the deep end a little bit. I joined a call, must have been February before the March that I joined, and this that Andrew was on that call with us, right? ZenPilot co-founder. So he led this exercise of, and I was fresh to the company. I didn't know what to expect, but it was one of our SOSA meetings, and he said, "Close your eyes," and I was like, "Okay, that's new." Close your eyes, and he was reading kind of the I think it was the 3-year vision, elements of it, like point by point. Like imagine it's like you said, at that point it wasn't, I think it was 2020, yeah, it was 2026, I think. And he was saying, this is true, we've got you mentioned like different parts of the vision are going to speak to different people. The part that spoke to me that definitely made me feel something was we are the authority on agency operations, kind of out in the market. People know us as the experts for that. If there's agency operations problems, we're the best people to talk to. So, if I were to talk with somebody who's got this problem of lack of clarity of vision, it might feel a little bit awkward at first. And definitely my first impression was, this is a little cultish, isn't it?
Yeah.
However, it did register on an emotional level. I have to admit, it made an impression on me, and it made it much more it made it clear that there's a level of care about the vision. There's an investment in there. So try that on a call. Try to meditate on the vision with your team, I guess is what I'm advocating for here. I'm curious, actually, and this is a bit of a tangent before we move on to other areas of clarity is kindness. Did that practice of close your eyes, think about the vision, did that start from the beginning of ZenPilot, or how did that come to be?
That did not start at the beginning of ZenPilot. That's something that I thought Andrew was the first time I saw him do, close your eyes visualization, was my freshman year of college together in 2007. And he played goalie on our college lacrosse team and was very into the mental side of performance as it relates to sports. And so was, meditating on stuff, visualizing, making the saves, making the plays, making the right passes,
right?
And even visualizing the fundamental pieces that go into it. What's what does the footwork look like? And so that kind of evolved later on with ZenPilot, but that's been a piece that he brought to the table super early on, and was very new to me, and seemed weird at first, and it's actually very helpful.
Yeah. But we are continuing that, right? On the offsite just a couple months ago, Andrew wasn't there, but we still did that exercise in person, and that was super, super special. And I wanted to say, watchers and listeners, you should too close your eyes and visualize yourselves following Agency Journey and ZenPilot on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. But that's as much of a CTA as I'm going to throw in there. So we talked about, and I think if somebody's if they're thinking about the vision piece, we gave them something to chew on, something to think about. But there's a whole slew of other areas to look at. You mentioned EOS. I'm thinking of the EOS 6 slices. And when I hear you talk about clarity is kindness, I feel like often this focuses on the people slice of things. Mm-hmm. I would love for you to talk to that a little bit more in terms of managing people either in an owner position or high-level agency leadership position. How do you know that you've got lack of clarity there? What are the symptoms? Let's start there once again before we talk about how to build clarity, practically speaking.
Yeah, I think clarity is, when you hear clarity, I'm curious, what are some of the things that you think of? If I just said, I need you to bring more clarity to this podcast or to a meeting, what are are there any things that come to mind right away?
For me, clarity is about removing doubt, removing ambiguity. If something is clear, then I know what is part of the plan, not part of the plan, part of the mission, not part of the mission, part of my job when we're talking about the people area, not necessarily part of my job or part of this role right now. That's the first thing that pops to mind.
Yeah, I think that, and a lot of times I think that can be associated with being direct. Like I want our team to be much more direct than probably most people raised up who spent any time in the corporate world or in at least the US education system are used to being. It just allows us to move faster, and it removes the ambiguity that you mentioned, which is great. The hidden thing, the kindness piece, like what else that eliminates or reduces is the anxiety that people feel when it's not clear. It's like, oh, did he say that because he meant I should actually be working more hours, or did he say that because he's glad that I'm taking a day off? Like there's just so many areas where we create stress and anxiety and stress on people that we wouldn't create if we were just a little bit more clear in terms of what we said, how we said it. And that's, clarity is all forms of communications. And I think ultimately clarity is a form of respect for others. So this takes me back to being a summer sports camp counselor through college and teaching kids like, hey, our primary rule here is respect. Like that's the number one rule before everything else is respect others, respect yourself, respect what's around us, the environment. And so being clear is a huge form of being considerate and respecting other people and how they're feeling. So I think getting rid of misunderstandings, anxiety, and stress is a big piece of it. So to go back to your question, was your question, how would we know that things are unclear?
Yeah, the symptoms, kind of, or the anti-patterns or bad habits that people might fall into here.
Yeah. So if we look at it, one of the first places that it shows up, if we just think of like, how does our business grow? If we're not clear in our positioning, this is one we've talked a lot about on this podcast, like who do we serve? How are we serving them? If that's unclear, you'll see it show up with folks either not doing enough on the growth side of your business, not having a clear filter for who we accept in as a client to work with us, and also not having a clear target of who are we after. Are we serving agencies, or are we serving manufacturing firms? Or are we serving healthcare facilities? Who are we after? In terms of how you're delivering work, there's a lot of uncertainty. This is emblematic of most teams that come to us. There are people on the team who are certainly unclear on how exactly we ought to deliver work. What's the right order? What's the right steps? What's the right process for how we do it? At a management layer, there's a real lack of two things. One, it's actual data to make better decisions. And two, for most of those teams, it's also, I don't even know exactly what I should be measuring. Like that hasn't been relayed to me from the ownership side or from the leadership side. Like, what do they actually care about and measure my performance on? And then I don't know what to measure that then impacts those few key things. So it'll show up in a lot of different places, but those are a few that pop to mind right away.
Okay, so I'm curious about that last one in particular. I feel like that one might be something that a listener might be hearing and thinking, okay, so like, how do I take some steps to remedying that? Another question that might pop up is like, should all of my team members have something that they're measuring, even if it's like a typical individual contributor, frontline? I call them frontline. You talked about extreme ownership, and now these metaphors come to mind.
Right.
Frontline roles. So tell me a little bit more about that one.
For sure. Yeah, I think everybody's measuring and measured on some type of output. We could run through a bunch of different examples, like marketing role. Hey, here's Kuba's seat. We care a lot about, I think most of growth boils down to creating conversations and then having quality conversations. And that's a framework that came from Christopher Filipiak, who I coached with on the sales side for a while. And so on the marketing side, that is largely creating conversations. So how many first-time appointments, how many qualified first-time appointments are getting created out of our marketing department? That's the ultimate outcome. That's the number that I care about and that I'll look at every single week. what numbers does it take from you on the marketing side to get there? Like that's the next piece to get figured out, and that you then have to work with your team to say, hey, here's what I need to be able to get to the number of conversations created that we need. And you go to the sales side, and the marker of the quality of those conversations, if those are actually qualified conversations, and you can't retroactively qualify somebody, there's got to be a qualification matrix on the front end and say, I decided to invest my time to show up on this conversation and have this conversation. That means, that should mean, hey, I thought there was some legitimate reason to think this was an actual prospect. So close rate is, and then obviously, closed won amount is tied to that. But, there's a couple key metrics on the sales side that you want to look at and measure. And then there's a whole bunch of other indicators that tie into that. How many folks are moving to this stage of the process, and then to a quote sent, and then to a ultimate win. So there's more stuff on the sales side that they'd be looking at, but I at a higher level don't care about all the nitty gritty. There's just a few numbers that I care about. Right. So those, and we can keep going on the delivery side or like other individual contributor roles. What are some examples there? But I think the other part of your question was, what should I be doing to get to understand what those metrics or KPIs or measurables are? Mm-hmm. And I think also from extreme ownership, the idea that great leaders don't ask, hey, what should I do here in this situation? Instead, they tell whoever they're reporting to, their boss, here's the situation. Here's my plan of attack. Here's what I'm going to go do. And that's your way of basically saying, hey, if you object to this, do it. Otherwise, I'm stepping up to lead. I've got the most information. I'm going to go make the decision here. And so I do the same thing here. If I'm sitting in a seat where there's nothing in place, I'd say, hey, here's the metric that I think is important, and I'm going to start measuring every single week, and I'll be reporting on that to you. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see, rather than saying, hey, what should I be measured on? So I'd take that same approach. And if I'm an owner listening to this, I'd take ownership of the fact that, hey, my people don't have any clarity on what to run towards right now. And so the same thing as vision, like start as simple as possible and give folks, 1-2 things to care about, to track, and start there. And it won't be perfect enough to tweak and adjust from there.
A thought that pops in my mind based on what you said is, you think as a leader that you can give people autonomy, but also I think it needs to be bi-directional. It needs to also come from the other side, that this autonomy needs to be taken by the other side. What you're talking about, when you said extreme ownership, my mind goes to a book that's very similar in concept called Turn the Ship Around. Also, right. Like in a similar vein, that one's about the crew of a submarine. I read that, recommended by a guest from the previous podcast that I ran. And the key phrase that's stuck in my mind there is "I intend to." It's a very similar concept to what you mentioned, but I've been using that ever since. And I've been, when I was in a leadership position, also teaching that to my team. Just start your sentences with "I intend to," like you said. Here's my plan of attack, and this creates, this also. I feel like sending that kind of signal already creates clarity in the sense of, I expect you to have a plan, come with a plan, and I sign off on the plan or I comment on the plan. But this is what the dynamic should be like. In Turn the Ship Around, it was called a leader-leader dynamic instead of a leader-follower dynamic.
Huge.
Yeah. So that's kind of what pops in my mind here. That's kind of where we went with that one. So one last piece on the people front before we pick maybe a third one and try to make this not one of the longest episodes ever on the agency journey. Let's try and aim for that is, how would you address clarity in terms of responsibilities? Like, I feel like a symptom of chaos might be that, myself as a leader, I expect certain situations to be handled by a person in a certain role. And we look at that situation in retrospect and they say, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to think about that, care about that. I didn't think that was part of my job description, or, that situations like this should be something that I'd be looking at. So how would you address, if that's a symptom, how would you address that? How would you create clarity? What are the tools here?
Right. So your org chart, or what entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, calls the accountability chart, is kind of the fundamental tool for trying to say, hey, here are the 5 main roles of your function. You're in a marketing seat. Here's the 5 main things that you're responsible for doing. And that covers the majority of stuff. The reality is it's never going to cover, those are meant to be hey, these are the big things. There are certainly going to be at minimum 20% of other things that pop up, and it's unclear who owns that. And so this is part of clarity, being kindness is creating a culture also where that's so much of the expectation that people hopefully will raise that as an issue, and you'll be great at saying, hey, this is an issue. Nobody's quite sure where it goes. We've got people who are hungry to see it solved and to pitch in and solve it. And it's just making a decision of being clear on who's actually going to solve it. So it's not, I don't think there's any perfect system for saying, here's 100% of the situations that come up and it's 100% clear who owns all of it. I think we can get the vast majority of that covered with a really simple tool like the accountability chart. And the accountability chart is every single role in the organization. You picture this as like, hey, what's the right and best thing for the organization, the right and best number of kind of boxes or functions, what needs to get done. That's not titles. It's just hey, we need somebody in marketing. And the first thing they're responsible for is creating first-time appointments. And then there's each of the bullet points as part of that function. But it will cover the vast majority of things, but there is going to be stuff that falls in between. And so part of that then is, hey, what are the departments that we have? Who leads that? That's probably the point person. If it's a growth related thing, it's whoever's sitting in that growth function on the accountability chart, who's probably the main person. But there's certainly questions and stuff that you have to work through as you just deal with the day-to-day of any organization.
Got it. Okay, so let's leave the people part of this, aside, or maybe it'll be connected what we look at next. So coming back to the 6 EOS slices, what were they? Vision, traction, people, data. There was also processes, I think. Let's pick, not to overextend the episode, but let's pick another one where you think that lack of clarity can be especially, harmful. And following a similar framework, like what are the symptoms? What is an agency owner likely looking at that's a symptom of lack of clarity, how that might be hurting them and how to address it?
Are you asking me to pick which of the 6 key components?
Yeah, based on your experience, like what can wreak the most havoc where you don't have clarity there?
Right. Process all the time does. And process shows up most commonly with the earlier stage teams who we work with, and just a lack of, hey, we've spent very little time. We've got some stuff documented, but we have very little documented. And the way that shows up tends to be, I've got this one account manager who's absolutely crushing it. All their clients love them, very high, success rates, referral rates, NPS scores, all that kind of stuff. Right. And then I brought on somebody else, or I've got these other people, and it's totally opposite. And so much gets attributed to just, I just need to clone Kuba and I need to not have Greg take on any more client accounts. And it's just a people first thing. But really what's different is, and I think we often over ascribe value to a certain personality type. Then it's like, oh, Kuba's just engaging. He's got this hello thing that he does, and he just wins people's hearts and warms them up and brings them on board. When really what's happening is there's a huge distinction in process between the two. And if you actually got in and looked at what's happening, how is the prep work being done? What's happening on those calls? What's happening in terms of follow-up and in communication with clients? You would realize almost every time that there's a huge process gap between what they're doing. And so that's how it often shows up, is it gets kind of pushed back to what we think is a people issue, but it's really a lack of clarity on process, kind of core root of the symptoms that we're observing. So that's the first place that it shows up. I would say the other piece around processes and the lack of clarity around processes is like, where do I go to get them? Even in larger teams who have documented processes, there are a lot of questions about, is this updated? Is this accurate? This isn't even what we should be doing anymore. Where do I find this? Where do I find that? And so those are a lot of the pains around lack of process that this is one that just takes continuous effort. Like your processes will always be evolving to some degree. And so this isn't a one-time set it and forget it type of, none of these areas are one-time set it and forget it. Clarity is not the natural state of things. And so it is, this is discipline that we have to build into ourselves and into our organizations to create clarity for the team. The outcome is well worth it. The outcome, I mean, just in terms of efficiency, much less like the huge benefits to your people, and to the impact, the impact of the efforts that you're doing. But just in efficiency, there's huge gains that come from it. But it takes some ongoing effort tied to it.
I like that last part in particular. Clarity is not the natural state of things. That'll be a clip for sure. Okay, so give me one more piece, a little bit more about this. If only we could clone. I mean, you say Kuba. I would probably say Jeff from our team situation. Like, I don't know. I notice a lot of guests do that when they mention kind of my name as like the example person name, but I think it can be confusing sometimes. So, this was just an example. Anyway, let's say somebody's, again, kind of nodding their heads at that, right? Okay, yeah, I have that one overperforming person. What do I do? Do I sit them down and kind of try to download their brain into an SOP? Is it, that simple, or is there more to it?
Yeah. I think there's a piece of that. I think it's actually more helpful to have somebody else watch what they do, take notes on it. Hey, here's the process that I observed. And almost always when they write it down, it won't be exactly what the process that the person thought they were doing. We see this, I know I'm going to lose just about everybody here. We see this in baseball all the time. Okay. So in baseball, you hear some great hitters describe what their swing is like. And this is where I have to be careful not put my arms together. But you got these Hall of Fame hitters talking about how they swing down on the ball. Like they start here, they talk about all their pre-pitch routine, and then they're swinging down and through the baseball. And then you think like, man, how's that line up? How are they hitting all these home runs? And they're putting the ball in the air a lot, and they're pulling it. And, they've tapped into all this pull side power that they have, that swing, and how they're always thinking about opposite field and hitting down through the ball. Like, what's going on? And then you look at their actual swing and break it down, and what they're saying is actually not what they're doing often. Okay. And so you will observe differences between that, and that mindset can be part of, like, both of those are valuable. The mindset that they had, the idea of staying behind the ball, and we're going to hit it to the opposite field. We're taking fastballs and we're putting them into right center, and that allows us to be on time to off-speed pitches as well. And their idea of like, I'm swinging down, that allows me to keep the barrel through the zone longer and, have more success. So the mindset is actually valuable, even if it's not 100% lined up with what they're doing. And so I think having somebody else shadow, like, oh, cool. Like, I want you to just literally, you're just going to be on Zoom all day with Jeff. He's just going to go about his normal work day. He's just sharing his screen as he works through stuff. And we're just seeing what he does. And then I want you to be the one who comes back and says, here's what I observed about his process that looks different from mine. And here's what I think his process is. And he says, I didn't even think about that. Like, this is the intention. Here's what I did with intention that you captured. Yeah. And here's the piece that you missed. And here's what I unintentionally did, and don't replicate that. And both of those can be very powerful to do. So I think that's one of the things that has gotten more, the flaw 10 years ago was that people would shadow, but nobody would document. So everyone was in person, you'd shadow, and a lot of the success of your team came down to, who did you shadow with? Oh, you shadowed with Jeff, you turned into a great performer. You shadowed with Gray, you turned into a terrible performer. Now it's the opposite. Now we document more, but we do so little shadowing because we're all remote. And so I think it's what we're after is merging both of those concepts.
Yeah. You ended on a very interesting note there, that it's like almost like an overcorrection, and like a blend of the two could be useful. And I agree. I've never done shadowing. I've been shadowed maybe once or twice, particularly on the way I did things in ClickUp at my previous company. But I do agree that could be really. I mean, it even comes down to the little things, like what kind of keyboard shortcuts people use, or like how they move
Yep.
data between, maybe various tools. Like, there's a lot of nuance here that can save you a lot of time, or can make you waste a lot of time. And on the subject of self-awareness, this reminds me of a little adventure I had with ChatGPT some time ago, where and it's a typical play for content marketers. You take a bunch of content. In this case, it was like a library of my LinkedIn posts, and I asked ChatGPT, or maybe it was Claude, I forget, to analyze my writing style and kind of tell me what my style is like. And I thought I wouldn't be surprised by any of this, but there was this one element there that said, well, Kuba uses a lot of self-deprecating humor in his writing style. And I was like, I do, but I wasn't aware of that. I'm not consciously doing that. It's just part of me being me. And having that be articulated by an external observer, even if it is a machine in this case, is really useful. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think that's a very, very good point. All right. So we've covered like 3 big points in terms of clarity is kindness. As I mentioned, not to make this like the longest episode ever. However, there's 2 more things that I wanted to touch upon. One is an objection related to something that you said like half an hour ago. You said that clarity can also be rephrased as being direct. So I think an objection that might pop up is, okay, I mean, I want to be direct with my team, but how can I be direct without being at the same time blunt and kind of damaging some of the relationship, causing, pardon the expression, emotional damage in the process? Like, do you have any advice on striking that balance?
Always more blunt than you think for 95% of people, probably. Yeah, I just think that's most of us would much rather know that people are just speaking their mind and saying, here's exactly how I feel. And that has lined up for me experientially. I've coached people on, hey, I would have phrased this differently. I've never told someone, oh man, you should not have said what you really felt about that. I'm sure that there are people. That's why I say 95%, not 100% of folks. But I would say way more often than not, just be candid.
Be more blunt is basically the advice.
Yeah.
And what about a person that might be worried about, like I said, kind of the relationship piece of it, or the way it's received on an emotional level?
So I think this goes both ways. I think this is also a me being honest or candid means I also hopefully am letting people know where they really stand in my mind. Like, hey, I actually do love and care about you, and not just for the work that we're doing or for whatever else, but I care a lot about you on a personal level as well. And so hopefully, and this is all part of, I've used this phrase before. I don't love the phrase like build relational equity, because it sounds like I'm trying to make these investments so that I have something that I can then draw down over time. When I think of it more as like, no, I really do love the people that I work with, and I want to see them succeed here, there, wherever, and in all aspects of life. I want to see them flourish. But I do understand the concept of relational equity too, which is if they don't understand that, and now you're giving very blunt, negative or constructive criticism, then it's very hard for that not to be taken personally and not to feel the wrong way. So there certainly is a too far that we can go in saying,
sure.
And so it's not just how do I feel about you, but also calling out the good stuff on our core values. Celebrating good work is like, I also have to be honest if I really love something, and make an effort to make sure that I'm sharing that too. But there is too far that we can go, and we could, just tear down everything, have zero filter. That's like, a filter is not lying. A filter is being professional. But for most of us, we have too much of, we think that we're being professional when really we're just not being honest with people.
Okay. So the way I'm understanding this is, you're saying it cuts both ways, because on the one hand, if I'm receiving a piece of feedback that something is not okay, I'm taking that seriously. Or, if it's, how should I say that? The degree of intensity is something I can trust. If you're giving, on the other hand, if there's praise and it's strong praise, you're not over exaggerating it for me to feel better. Like
Right.
I can trust your words basically because you always kind of steer in the direction of truth and clarity. So
Yep.
I think that's really powerful. And one thing I wanted to ask you for here is could you dumb down relational equity for me a little bit more? For somebody who's listening to this who doesn't
Right.
understand, that person is me. Could you dumb it
Right.
down a
Right.
little bit?
Sorry. Yeah, the idea being that we need to invest in having a relationship or like some kind of bond, so that when I say things that are
Right.
negative about your performance, that doesn't crush you. Like the only thing that we talk about isn't just your performance and is this good or bad. And that's like, the trap for anyone to fall into is our identity gets confused with our performance. And so then our self-worth gets confused and conflated with, did I do well at work today or did I not do well at work today? And those are the emotional swings and huge ups and downs that are just not sustainable and lead to burnout, dissatisfaction, lack of fulfillment, like all kinds of negative outcomes. So relational equity is just like, hey, do we have a strong enough interpersonal bond that I can give you constructive criticism and you know that I still care about you and love you as a person? But I'm at the same time, and like this is what we have with our kids. Like you've got to discipline your 3-year-old and say, hey, this is not okay. This is not what we do. I'm not happy with how you performed here. But that has nothing to do with the fact that I love you like crazy as your father. And this doesn't change that at all.
Right. Yeah. And if anybody listening to this is a parent, then I think they know what a difficult balance it might be sometimes to strike. At the same time, striking that balance is what it's all about in this sort of relationship. And from what you're saying, from what I'm hearing and understanding, and also agreeing with your team members as well, that was huge. That was powerful. That was awesome. Is one thing you would say, as host. I wanted to talk about the concept of seats in EOS. I feel like that is a smart frame for it, where you've got a seat and you've got a person, and the two are separate, and you can explore the fit between the two. A person may fit a seat, or that seat may not be right for a person. It might be right for a season, and then they grow it out of it, or something else happens. But that makes it less personal. It's about the seat and you fitting that seat, but it's not about like you as a person. So that came to my mind. Found it at the end. So my last question on this, and it's going to be a totally unfair question, I think, because I'm going to ask you to pick one thing, one conversation out of the whole concept, of clarity is kindness that you talk about a lot. Imagining, you've talked with hundreds, thousands probably, of agencies throughout your whole career. What is the one conversation or the one area or the one move that most of them probably need to make to create clarity? Like, what is the one that is most often missing and can make the biggest impact?
I will first go a little bit more ethereal and then bring it back to a tactical level. The first one is probably just being honest with themselves or ourselves, if I personalize it to me. I have had a lot of conversations now. We've been talking, people might have reached out about, hey, we're looking at onboarding with this tool called ClickUp, and then we found you, and we're talking about a very tactical thing. And in the course of the conversation, it just kind of naturally goes to why are you doing all that? I don't understand. There's a fundamental question to your business model, and I think that this thing is broken. And there've been a lot of times as I've gotten more comfortable where I've just said, hey, I'm 100% sure I don't know all the things about your business. You know it way more closely than I do. But can you help me square this from what you're saying you want to what you guys are actually doing today? I don't see how these match up. And there have been double-digit number of times where this is kind of separately, people have been somewhat offended, and I'll often say, can I say something I think might offend you?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
There have been times where I've certainly offended people. There have been double-digit number of times where people have come back a year or years later and said, hey, that conversation, you probably don't even remember it, but we had it and you said that thing. And that was actually really caused me to question stuff and figure out what I wanted. And here's the change that we made. And a lot of it, the common phrase is, I just got clear on what I wanted. And that happened from somebody just having the courage to ask, what's probably like, what are 8-year-olds would ask. They'd be like, oh man, this doesn't make sense. Like what's going on? But most of us aren't willing to step up and just ask those questions. So that's the first one, is just, and that doesn't need to come from the outside. I think often other people are used in our lives to help us get to that point of clarity and get to those breakthroughs. But it's just questioning, do what I say I want from life and the mission that I'm on, does that line up with the actions that I'm taking right now and the way that I'm building this organization? So that's the first one.
So an example of that might be, tell me if I'm understanding this correctly. You say you want to run a data-driven agency, but at the same time, I'm seeing you not tracking time. It doesn't match up. Is that an example of that?
That's an example. I'd say probably a more common example is like, hey, I've got this strong passion to be working in this one specific space, or working with these types of projects, or I want to be out of day-to-day delivery. But what I keep doing is I keep saying yes to every piece of business that comes into me. And there's no way I can build any repeatable systems to hand off work to anybody else, because every product is completely unique. I'm not pricing it like it's unique. I'm doing, very inexpensive work trying to solve these problems that I'm really not even, I can't charge a premium because I'm not even that good at solving them. I'm just good at figuring it out and getting to a passable or and sometimes a very good outcome. But I'd say that's a more common example.
Okay.
And that bleeds into the more concrete thing that I would say, like where I see this cause the most pain for folks, is they haven't figured out who they're for and who they're not for yet. So if you would have told me 10 years ago, someday you will run a business, this is the largest business that you've ever run, and it's only going to service this specific type of client on top of this one specific software that was started in 2017 and hardly anybody knew about until 2020. And you won't accept people who don't work with that software, even though you could help them out with all, with process development and with team training and all these other pieces. I would have been like, those are crazy constraints, and I can't see that happening. And the truth is, making those hard decisions and clear decisions about who we work with, who we're for, and who we're not for, has been the best catalyst for growth and for building and it was ultimately the right recipe for the type of business that I was after, much more intentionally with ZenPilot than with like GuavaBox, our first agency. So, and I'd say that's, I'm going to go to the Inbound conference a month after we record this together. So in September, and a bunch of friends who I talk to, a bunch of other agencies who I speak with, a common trend of folks who feel generally pretty fulfilled with the teams that they've built. Everyone's struggling with something, but who feel more fulfilled and who are having more success externally, team size, revenue, profitability, that kind of stuff, will be that they've also made that decision and they've figured out who they're for and who they're not for. And so I'd say that's the very first thing. This is like dumb advice, because what do you do when you build a business? You like solve somebody's problem somewhere, and you need to know what problem you're solving and who it's for. But the reality is that's not very clear to many, many agency teams. And so getting clear on that is the number one concrete thing that I would recommend.
Right. To flip it again, and I have thoughts on that to add on top, but to flip it again, so what lack of clarity might be looking like here is that you're doing too many things for too many people, or too many different types of things, too many different types of services, too many different types of businesses. I love that. This whole latter half of the conversation has been awesome. I mean, not to put, not to kind of qualify one versus the other, but just I'm excited to hear about that. And I've been host of Agency Journey now for, I think, half a year or so. And already the one trend that's been emerging, one thought that I've heard, I think the most frequently, is I keep talking with people who have found success because they not just figured out, but finally kind of took the plunge on their niche and their positioning. And now I'm not surprised that you mentioned this already, a few times throughout this episode, and I'm sure it'll come up again. Like, I picked my lane, so to speak, and it was scary and it made for some hard choices, but I'm so glad I did. And I keep hearing that from successful agency leaders, agency operators, as we would say, all the time on this podcast. So I wanted to underline that. And that's, I think, a nice moment to tie a bow on this episode, which I didn't fulfill my goal here. We made it a little bit of a longer one, but hopefully a useful one for you, watchers and listeners out there, and fans of Agency Journey, hopefully. Anything else to add on top of that before I do, the quick close your eyes, subscribe to Agency Journey exercise with everybody here?
That's right. Some of them will need their eyes open. I think that the call to action from me before you give the call to action would just be, it is often easier to see more clearly other people's situation than your own situation. So that's not an excuse for not trying to figure out our own stuff and make those hard decisions. So strive for clarity, work for clarity in your own organization. If you need help operationalizing those things, come to Zen Pilot. But also, the call to action would be, give that gift of clarity to someone else. Obviously, not fully or rarely fully unsolicited. But if you've got someone who has ears that might be willing to hear, and you are seeing something that seems clear, don't be afraid to share it with other people.
Yeah. I wonder if somebody listening to this will come to somebody in their life, professionally or otherwise, and is going to say, "Can I say something that might offend you? You say you want this, but your actions are saying something else. What's up with that?" And I think that will be you, watcher or listener, practicing clarity is kindness. And that's one of the main messages that I've learned from this man over here. Greg McKenzie was our guest here today. Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If you want more conversations like this, as I mentioned, maybe don't close your eyes because you'll need them, but find a way to subscribe to Agency Journey on your favorite podcast platforms. Follow Zen Pilot on YouTube. And yes, indeed, if you want somebody to hold a mirror to your business, operationally speaking, help you find better productivity, build a happier, more productive, more profitable team, go to zenpilot.com, read about what we do. And yes, we do only do it for a particular type of company in one tool, and that's ClickUp. Go check out our book a call page and have a conversation with us. It's free. It's like therapy in a sense, and you might take away a lot from it. That's it for today. Thank you so much for... All right. Thank you so much for joining us here today, watchers and listeners. And we'll see you in the next one. That's all, folks. Bye-bye.